Welcome to the third video on solving trig equations. Today we're going to be tackling equations where we've got a little bit of rearranging of the equation to do before we can jump into the solving process that we practiced in the previous two videos. If you haven't watched those videos, go back and watch those first, as we'll be using a lot of the skills that we taught in those first two videos in today's. Think about this equation like a linear equation. Imagine it was 4x plus 2 equals 3. Yeah, not sine x, but just x. What would we do? Well, the first thing we would do is we would subtract 2 from each side. Yeah, just our usual balancing process. What does this leave me with? Well, this positive 2 subtracting 2 just leaves me with 4 sine x on this side. And on the right hand side, because whatever I do to the left I have to do to the right, I've got 3 subtract 2, and that just leaves me with 1. Again, think about it like a linear equation. If it was just 4x equals 1, what would we do? We would divide each side by 4. And this gets us to something that should hopefully look familiar. Sine x equal to a quarter, or if you do a quarter on your calculator, 1 divided by 4, or you know what a quarter is, then you should get that as 0.25. I'm going to go with a decimal because that's what we've seen in the previous two videos, so hopefully that feels a bit more familiar. Now this line here is exactly the same as the questions from video 1. We're going to try and solve this using exactly the same formula, so this bit is not new. First thing we do when we're solving this is we're going to complete our cast diagram. Remember, we look at our value and see if it's positive or negative. We've got positive 0.25, so we tick the A quadrant, and we tick the one that matches our trig function, so in this case, S. Remember, there's a series of rules that go with each of these quadrants. I'll quickly go through them again. If you've got the A quadrant ticked, it's the answer you get off your calculator. If you've got the second quadrant ticked, the sine quadrant, it's 180 minus the answer off your calculator. In the third quadrant, it is 180 degrees plus the answer off your calculator. And in the fourth quadrant, the cosine quadrant, 360 minus that answer off your calculator. Okay, that's how you get each solution based on what quadrants you're working in. Okay, how do we get this answer on our calculator? Where does this first value come from? It comes from doing the inverse sine of our value. Only ever the positive value, and we'll remember that for the next example. In our calculators, we're doing second function, sine gets this inverse sine up, and we put in 0.25, and we get an answer of 14.5 degrees. We have to actually check to see if this is one of our answers. So we have a look, yep, and we've got that first quadrant ticked where the answer on our calculator is one that we want. So we can write that down. X is equal to 14.5 degrees. It is one of our solutions. But how do I get the other answer? Well, I'll look at the other quadrant I've got ticked. I've got the sine quadrant ticked, and the rule for that quadrant is 180 degrees minus that 14.5 degrees. And that gives me my two solutions to this first problem, 14.5 degrees and 165.5 degrees. You can guess where this is going. We're going to look at another example now where we end up with a negative value. And this is really important to note, and I'll point it out right at the start here, is that the value currently is not negative. Yeah, it's not negative. So it's really important that we're not using our cast diagram at this point. We have to do all of our rearranging first and then complete the cast diagram. Rearranging the same as the previous example, we're going to start by subtracting 6 from each side. And that's going to leave me with 5 tan x equal to negative 2. Next, we're going to be dividing by 5. And that's going to get me to this line, tan x equals negative 0.4. Again, this should look really familiar from the previous videos, so we're just going to jump straight into solving this. We ask ourselves the question, is my value positive or negative? It's negative. If it was tan and it was positive, I would be ticking A and I would be ticking T. I'm not going to be picking those because it's negative. That leaves me with the second quadrant and the fourth quadrant. What are the rules for those quadrants? 180 degrees minus the answer I get on my calculator. and 360 degrees minus that answer I get on my calculator. Let's go ahead and try and solve this then. First thing, inverse tan. And here's where it can all go wrong. We never use the negative value in our calculator at this point. The negative helps me pick the quadrants, and then I don't need it anymore. So I'm looking at the inverse tan of 0.4. Second function, tan, type in your 0.4, and you get a solution of 21.8 degrees. I say a solution, but it's not actually one of our answers at all. We don't want this first quadrant answer. We want answers in the second and fourth quadrants. So where do they come from? Well, we've got the rules written already. We've got 180 degrees minus 21.8, and our second solution, 360 degrees minus 21.8. That gives me two answers. X equals 158.2 degrees and 338.2 degrees. Two solutions using a lot of the skills from the first two videos, but solving the problem when we have a bit of rearranging to do first.